Today's conversation is called The Future Through the Eyes of Youth Leaders. We are joined with six high schoolers from across the country. I will be the host today. My name is Irshad Molla, and I'm a youth leader. Today's conversation is called The Future. Okay. I'm a youth leader here at LRC. For those who are new to Living Conversations, we are an organization working to bridge divide through small group conversations. We offer a simple, sociable, and structured way to practice communicating across differences while building understanding and relationships. Typically, 4 to 7 people meet in person or by video call for about 60 to 90 minutes. And you're going to get a glimpse into what it looks like right now. Hopefully you'll be inspired to host your own conversation. We have over hundreds of guides about various topics, including this one that you can check out on our website. Please feel free to follow along with the guide and put down your thoughts in the live chat. Before we start our intros, I'd like to share a fun fact. We are all alumni of Citizen University's National Youth Collaboratory Cohort 4, and we've all met in person in Seattle and Atlanta last year, so this is a mini reunion. Okay, so with that, let's start with intros. I would like your name, where you're from, your school, your grade, and what work you do.
I can start, I guess. I'm Martine. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Syracuse, New York. I'm a junior at Nottingham High School in the city. I don't know. I feel like I wear many hats. I do some work with obviously like civic work, including with Citizen University. I'm interested in gender equity and menstrual justice work. A lot of that is through the Girl Up organization. So like the most common thing we do is ensuring that like people in our community have the products that they need. And we do some like speaker series and events to gather people kind of similar to this. And then also some education justice work, both like with bigger organizations like Student Voice and also locally. And that actually tends to be pretty dialogue based as well.
I guess I can pick it up from Martine. My name's Aditi. I use she, her pronouns as well. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I am a senior at Sycamore High School. So like Martine said, I also have a lot of hats. I work in environmental justice with 0 Hour Ohio, and I also work with civic education specifically for immigrant communities through an organization called Civic Immigrant that I founded with the support of Citizen University. And then I also work with some other youth publications to highlight the voices of youth like everybody here.
I can hop in. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I am from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and go to school at Linn-Mar High School. I use he, him pronouns as well. I guess some of the things I do. I am the president of Key Club International, which is essentially a service organization. It mobilizes students to serve in communities around the world. And I'm also the vice chair of the State of Iowa Youth Advisory Council, which pursues legislative advocacy to represent young people across my state. That's some of the stuff I do. But I think we all sort of also wear many hats as well, all of us here. So that's just a few things.
All right, I'll jump in. My name is Megan. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Newark, Delaware. I'm a current senior attending Newark Charter High School. And like everyone else said, I think we all wear many hats, but most notably, I do a lot of environmental work, environmental education, sustainability, climate justice, all of that. And I actually am the founder and exec director at the Urban Garden Initiative.
And hi everyone, my name is David Zool. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a junior at the magnificent Michael E. DeBakey High School for Health Professions in Houston, Texas. Just like many other of my colleagues in the call right now, I think we all wear a lot of hats, but I think my most magnificent work is going to be being a fellow at Mi Familia Vota, which is a national grassroots nonprofit organization that works to empower immigrants and really push for legislative change. Right now, I'm working with Mi Familia Vota to create policies at the 87th Texas legislative session.
So hi, I'm going to introduce myself again. So my name is Irshad Molla. I'm a senior at Dublin Scioto High School, which is in Columbus, Ohio. A lot of my work is like with vocal advocacy and helping the youth. So I'm the founder of Use Your Voice, where we teach curriculum and in classes and in conferences. And then I do work with like education justice, like Martine said, with Student Voice. So that's kind of my sum up. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the conversation agreement. So this will set the tone of our conversation. Okay, we're going to take turns reading it out loud. So I'll do the first one. So be curious and listen to understand. Conversation is as much about listening as it is about talking. You might enjoy exploring how others' experiences have shaped their values and perspectives.
Awesome. Thanks, Irshad. So the second point we wanted to highlight was show respect and suspend judgment. So people tend to judge one another. Setting judgments aside opens you up to learning from others and makes them feel respected and appreciated. Try to truly listen without interruption or crosstalk.
Amazing. So our third bullet is note any common ground as well as any differences. Look for areas of agreement or shared values that may arise and take an interest in the differing beliefs and opinions of others.
Great. The fourth point is be authentic and welcome that from others. Show what's important to you, speak from your experience, be considerate of others who are doing the same.
The fifth point is be purposeful and to the point. Do your best to keep your comments concise and relevant to the question you're answering. Be conscious of sharing airtime with other participants.
Okay, nice. And then I'll wrap it up. Own and guide the conversation. Take responsibility for the quality of your participation and the conversation as a whole. Be proactive in getting yourself and others back on track if needed. Use an agreed upon signal like the timeout sign if you feel the agreements are not being honored. Okay, so with that, we'll start with rounds. So the first one is getting to know each other. And the question is, what events or experiences drew you to the work you're doing right now? I can kick it off. So with me, like I said, vocal advocacy, I teach public speaking to like middle schoolers and high schoolers. And where that came from was as a kid, I was extremely shy. I had like I don't know, like 10 anxieties as a kid, but I just wouldn't make eye contact. I wouldn't talk. And the worst thing was how uncomfortable it was not to express yourself. And as I grew out of it, I wanted other kids not to feel that uncomfort, especially with people that like go through so much like trauma in their life and like abuse and people like mental health. So for them to be able to say like, hey, I deserve better, or hey, I'm going to stand up for someone else. That's where that comes from for me.
I think I can take it from there. Irshad, that's super inspiring. I think for me, working with immigrant communities, specifically in civic education, just came from personal experience. I grew up in India and moved to Cincinnati when I was little. So having that sort of immigrant experience was really what shaped my work, I think. And part of it was just sort of feeling like there was laws and policies that were affecting me, but like being in a family that couldn't vote in these elections, it sort of feels like you're like marginalized or that you don't necessarily have the same routes to advocating for yourself that other people do. And for me, working with Citizen University, civic education was what I felt helped me sort of gain the power to feel like I had a voice. And I wanted to help other immigrant communities with that as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of my work also, like both of you guys, like comes from personal experience. So I would divide like most of the projects I've done, at least throughout high school, to kind of like racial justice work and then environmental. So when it came to racial justice, growing up, I, as like an immigrant, as a minority, I just dealt with a lot of like cultural identity issues. So as I began to kind of further explore that throughout high school, that really took me down the path of just like increasing awareness and education when it comes to bias and stereotyping and all of those kinds of issues. And then when it comes to environmental work, same goes for everyone else, like personal kind of experiences. I grew up in a food desert kind of community or like right outside of one. So just like seeing that firsthand and being able to work in a lot of gardens within the city really got me into then starting the Urban Garden Initiative, which as pretty self-explanatory by the name, creates a lot of like community gardens in different cities all around the world. So
Mine's sort of two-part, like Megan as well. The service piece, and I have kind of a service piece and a policy piece, I guess. And I think both of them really stem from they gave me a sense of purpose, which I think is true for all of us here. I think that's kind of why we do everything we do. And so there was that part. I think for policy, it was a lot of young people are almost an underrepresented population. And so that's why I worked with young people to create policy and advocate for policy that represents young people. So I think that was a lot of my purpose there, just understanding that issue that we face. And then just with service, again, it was a sense of purpose that it was something that was meaningful to me. And so I think that's why I engaged in it.
Well, oh, you go ahead, David.
Thank you, Martine. I think I kind of do reflect a lot of what my drives are, same as Alex, except from the fact that it's kind of two parts. Well, mine is to empowerment through service and really making sure that we can have racial justice in our society, and especially in Houston. I know that a lot of areas in Houston have really high poverty areas. We often look upon these people as being second-class citizens, and I guess that really empowered me to really go out into my community and show these people that and their children that they can become our politicians today. They can make a change and make the policies that we want. We've done a lot of that in Houston, but I know that Texas is a very different state, and I really think that's what really motivated me to really have that purpose.
Yeah, I definitely resonated with a lot of what has been said. I guess finding that common ground to go back to our norms, but I think really just falling in love with the community of like the organizing space, especially locally. I think like it's very easy, and it is actually like it's easy to look up to it, but especially in like a virtual space when you can just hop on a Zoom with people from across the country, I think it's easy to just look to national work and national like organizations that are registered nonprofits. And I think also valuing like the really like it's a little cliche, but like grassroots local community. I know like groups in Syracuse like Seeds of Peace, Axe Youth Council, like I've really been able to like find community through that. And I think with that work with like a very diverse group of people with a lot of like different lived experiences. And I think just like the love that I like, I guess, hold for that is really what excites me about this all.
After hearing everyone, I'm curious to learn. So what is like one project you're working on currently, like with given the COVID situation? So I can just start off with mine. So one thing I'm doing with Living Room Conversations is I'm making a youth, I've already established it, but we're making a youth cohort. So that meets monthly. We have right now like 13 kids from across the country coming in. And so it's just really interesting to have the dialogues they want, bring people that they want, panelists. So that's kind of my main project right now.
I really resonate with the piece of like being able to now work nationally and globally. I think when COVID first hit, especially given like the work that Tugi does, it's very in person. It's very, we're working directly in the classroom. We're building gardens. Like, how are we going to translate that to virtual? So I think both the past year, but especially the past couple months, we've really started to kind of utilize that like national global community. We've expanded a lot. Now we're in like I want to say like 12, 15 different countries, which would have just been entirely impossible if like not for everyone kind of being virtual and looking for a lot of these ways that they can still engage with their community virtually. So I'm definitely continuing to work on that kind of like national global expansion piece.
Yeah, I think going off of that, a lot of my experiences have been the same in that it's almost been a little bit of an advantage because it has allowed us to get that, I guess, global spread and like expand to more people. I think with Gen Z Rights, one of the publications that I work with, a lot of what we try to do is uplift youth voices by publishing their writing and their articles and the stories that they have to tell. And we've really found that like through the time that we've been struggling with COVID, we've been able to reach out to, I guess, like more corners of the globe and just have more of those underrepresented voices in our writing and in our storytelling, which has been really impactful to me.
One project that I've worked on sort of in the international realm that's been actually really cool. It just finished up, so it's not current, I guess, but I'm going to cheat a little bit. It's technically called Hydrate for 28, and it's a campaign with a nonprofit called Thirst Project, who raises awareness and funding for the global water crisis in many places. I know one of which is Eswatini. So we, with the COVID realm that we're in right now, devised a campaign focused on personal water consumption because that is critical to personal health. And so we had that component, but we also had a fundraising component so they could continue to build wells in various places across the world. So that was a really cool campaign that I got to work on recently.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. I think I saw you like post. I think I've seen a little bit of all of this on people's Instagram, so it's fun hearing more about it. I think for me, I actually don't know if I've talked about this publicly, so like debut, I guess, but there was a book written about my high school in the 80s that's very much focused on sociology and the culture of what our school was like then. And it's drastically changed. And so without like going too far in depth, a good friend Nafisa and I are working on building a new class at our school that's sort of a book study of that and learning about topics like education policy and urban geography that I think are like really often left out of our curriculum, and then hopefully like making some sort of new research or report, because we definitely have a very different story right now that I'm excited to tell.
That's really interesting, Martine. I'd love to read more about that. Right now, what I'm focusing on for my project is, as I said in the beginning, the 87 Texas legislative session. Normally, what we would do is we would bus lots of students towards the Capitol and really introduce them to the legislative process and the representatives. But I think that COVID has allowed for some additional advantages, like we are able to train so many more students than we would in the past, and more able to even connect with our own representatives through Zoom, through Teams. And it's something that we wouldn't be able to experience if we were in person. It would just be a day trip to the Capitol in Austin. But now we're able to expand that into several weeks, and we have so many youths from Houston joining in on this process. And I really think that's a huge advantage and key change for the future.
Nice. Okay, I'm gonna move on to round two. So round two, usually we have like a blurb to set up our questions. So in a world that can feel chaotic, looking to the future may seem overwhelming. To mollify anxiety and magnify hope, we're going to explore each other's aspirations for the world. Share your experiences in civic engagement, bridge building, and what drives you to make an impact in your communities. Hopefully by the end of it, we will all be inspired to make a difference despite the obstacles. Okay, so the first question I'm going to ask here is, what do you wish others, community members, youth, or anyone else understood about the work you're doing? I can kick it off again. Sorry, what was I saying? So for me, it would be telling other people that civics, like, it's not like we don't have a bunch of stats saying like, hey, this is the work we're doing. We don't have a bunch of people saying like, you've changed our lives. Like it's not like this very fast paced, like there'll be periods where it's fast, but it's so much about like step by step and like the longevity of it. It's not like what most people think it is. It requires patience and hard work. But the reason I say this is like it turns people off and like away, going like, oh, there's not many results. We're so result focused. So just to think like, even if one person changes, that's a lot. Like that really matters. So I really wish people understood that. Like even if it's small, there's such an impact to it, even if it takes forever. So that's kind of my perspective.
If I could just follow up on what you said, Irshad, sorry if I interrupted someone, but I really think that like the work that we're doing right now is not just going to benefit us, it's going to benefit our future generations. I really think that's what we need to tell our representatives. I know a lot of students in my school, I go to a mostly STEM high school. A lot of them are really concerned about having something that they can represent to colleges, like, oh, I did this statistics, I made this kind of change, and that's important. But the fact that civic work can create such social change over a long period of time, I think it really throws some students off. They have 4 years in high school and they really want to make an impact, but they don't see the kind of impact that you can make through civic engagement. I think that's the part that I really like, that our norms that we have today can be completely different within the next 4 years. You just have to really invest that time and do your service.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and one thing that both of you have touched on is just sort of the idea of breaking down the norms and stereotypes of what we think when somebody says civics or civic engagement. And I think most of the people in my community that I've talked to, often the first thing that comes to their mind is voting and like, what is voter turnout and how can we quantify that? And I think that is super, super important. And I have worked in those spaces, but there's also a lot of people that leaves out, especially non-voting, younger and immigrant populations. And those groups have so much to say and so much to advocate for that often gets left out because politicians don't feel accountable to those groups. And I think that's something that we've all touched on a little bit, but I think expanding that idea of civic engagement and civics to include those groups is very important. And I think that does come down to sort of breaking down those norms of civics being something that we can really quantify and that it's something in like the short run, like Irshad and David touched on.
Yeah, I think just touching on like a different area, again, going back to like environmental work, I think there's two things I want to talk about. First of them being that when it comes to environment, I think I see like two groups when I talk to people. It's one that's like super passionate, I really want to work within it. And this other group that's kind of, this is not really affecting me. Like, I don't really see this right now happening like right next to me. What can I do about it? It's not really, out of sight, out of mind. So knowing that, especially what just happened in Texas, I'm sure David, you could talk more about that, but and then what's like happening in California and for a lot of like island nations, like, yeah, maybe we don't live in them, but many people are suffering from the effects of climate change. And it's us as like a collective group that needs to step up and make change, not just people kind of living in those countries or those cities. So I think that's one aspect. And I think kind of in relation to that as well, like the power of individual action. Climate change is not something that's going to be solved overnight. It's not something that's going to, be able to fix itself within like 5-10 years. It really, like, corporations have a really large part within what needs to happen when it comes to climate action. But us as individuals, as students especially, also can play a really large role in like just making a change and doing a lot of simple things in our everyday lifestyle. So I think that's really important as well. And nothing has to be like, oh, I have to start a nonprofit to do this. Oh, I have to like create, this super tangible impact. Like those little things you're doing every day to think about it, I think that creates a lot of impact as well.
I was going to say something very, okay, cool. I was going to say something very similar to what you said towards the end, which is like activism and like organizing spaces are like they shouldn't be, and they're not exclusive. And I think like it's actually like the opposite of that, or at least it should be. And I think it's very easy to look at like roles and titles, and like that's what sort of we're trained to do. Like when you're looking for jobs, you want to know who has this title and this role. But I think understanding that it's more like intentional, meaningful action, even if it's personal, even if it's on the side, and there's not like, there's not a day where you snap your fingers and you're like, okay, I'm an activist, cool, like great, made it. It's a little bit more of a like ongoing, lifelong process that I think doesn't I guess just doesn't need to be like excluded for a few groups of people, and it can be really an intergenerational coalition of people doing that work.
What I kind of have been thinking about is, I'm guessing all of us here have gotten like the wow, like you do that, that's amazing type of thing. How do you do that? And I think the really big piece that I want to emphasize is that the work that I know that I'm doing, and I think that we're all doing, it's something that really everyone can do. And it materializes in different ways, right? You don't always have to have the position or title, but we can all serve, we can all create a positive impact, things like that. And so I guess the biggest thing I'd emphasize is that, we can all do this work. It's not subject to a few people. It's kind of like I think we've touched on it, but it's we can all kind of make a positive impact.
Adding to that is like we can all do it. Like I think we should all do it too. Like it should be like a duty for us, like an obligation to like serve to the, because everyone is like, oh, it's a side passion. It's not a side passion. It should be what you like. This should be what you should be doing too. And my thing, like with Use Your Voice, I like to tell people it's not just about public speaking and like that kind of activism. It has like we can't just reach, like we can't change the world just through one medium. We have like your art matters, your protest matters, your like videos matter, your writing matters. Like all of that is using your voice. All of that is changing the world, and we have to empower all of those mediums. Okay, if you guys would like to add on, that's good, or we can move on to the next question. Okay, move on. Okay, next question. So what challenges or reasons to hope have you encountered in your work?
If I could start this one off. So I don't want to shout out his name because I don't know if he would like to be shouted out, but I met this one freshman who just know so much more than me in terms of the work that I'm doing and the impact that can be created. And I really like that. I think that's some really good hope that I can see in the future. Is that my civic engagement work doesn't have to end whenever I leave my high school or my state to go to a different college. I know that there are other youths out there who have been trained, who have been told, and who's lived through this chaos we're in right now, and they can continue this work towards progress and improvement. That just brings a little bit of warmth to my heart.
I think for me, starting with challenges, it's a challenge these days in really almost every way, it feels like sometimes, to get people to listen, to get people to understand, to get people to engage with what you're saying, what you're doing. And I mean, that's one of the great things about living room conversations, of course. But I think you fail 99 times, but then one time you'll have a success, whether that's with advocacy work or somebody passes your policy or you get somebody to vote, something like that. And I think that's a reason to have hope, because out of 100 times, there's always one time where something goes well.
Yeah, I think on just like all of the things that we're saying on like a larger scale when it comes to like youth action and youth involvement, I think it's really great seeing this like new wave of like young people really like taking action on problems that they want to solve within their communities or globally. But I think at the same time, when we're actually like, maybe we have like a position or maybe we have a seat at something, like those people still aren't taking youth voices, kind of like youth ideas really seriously, which I think is a really big problem, especially when you get into larger organizations and larger businesses and all of that, and then youth kind of just become the face of it, and they're like, yeah, look at us, like really wanting to empower Gen Z, but a lot of our ideas and the things that we're doing still aren't actually being implemented. So I think I've seen that a lot through most of the work that I've been wanting to do, and I think just really taking what we're saying seriously and really valuing what we have to say, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think just building off of that, one of the biggest challenges I think is just getting people to listen. And I think it's more than sort of like a lot of the times as younger people or just as like minority groups, you get sort of this like cursory glance, like, okay, we'll take that opinion into account, but then we're never going to circle back on that. Or we're really not going to make that a large part of our decision making. And I think that comes from the idea of like power needing to be shared. And a lot of the times that isn't happening because there's not really intentful listening and intentful putting of those groups first. And I think one of the things that makes me hopeful is that there's definitely more of that happening, but it's still a challenge to get people to really listen. And I think just like getting people to take us seriously sometimes is a challenge that we encounter, but I think it is improving, which gives me hope.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all that's been said. I think like both intentional and also frequent listening to like all members of a community is like extremely important, especially that frequent part, that it's not like a one day of the year like roundtable, whatever, that it's something that's again circled back to. I think just like hope wise, especially with like within schools and stuff, I feel like the difference between a freshman and a junior seems like nothing in any other lens, but in high school that feels like a big gap. And it is exciting as I'm like beginning to think about like next steps after high school to see so many like freshmen and underclassmen who have like jumped into this work during a pandemic when like this is all they've known high school to be. So I think I've just been very excited about that. And it's good also to know that next year, if we're able to return in person more often, that we can like be in togetherness with these new groups, and it's not, ending with, one graduation or two graduations. And I think just in terms of challenge, I think when people, again, this has been said, I think when we think of civic engagement, we think of voting right away. And I think on the note of voting, it's important to note that every year is an election year. Like we have a really important local election this year in both my city and my county. So I'm really looking forward to getting people involved with that, but also, one day or 2 days out of the year, depending on a primary, is an election day. But I think every day is a day to organize or to sign a petition or to do something. So I think just understanding that sustained action is really necessary, and getting folks involved with that too.
I'll add one piece too. I'm just going to apply it to the current situation we're in right now. The pandemic is a challenge, but the hope is that next year we'll have vaccinations in our arms, and things will start looking up, and that's something that I am excited about. Let me tell you.
Whoops, same here. Very, very much looking forward to it.
I would like to give like a specific, I like your like ideas, but I want to give a specific story from like with Living Room Conversations. We do like many types of conversations. We did an intergenerational one. It was like, I don't remember when, but we had like the oldest person was 70 and then the youngest person was 16. So it was so interesting to listen to everyone. And by the end of it, like just like I had so many, I didn't even think I had judgments, but I had so many judgments going in against like the older person against the younger person. But after that, I was like, oh my God, like I did not know that. Like it just every time like an implicit bias is crushed, every time your judgment is suspended, I think that's a win, like for all of us in that way. So that's kind of my specific story with hope. Again, it's open if you guys want to add anything on, or I can move on again.
I think just one quick thing to add. I don't remember who made this point, but I do think it's important to know. I think one challenge that we face a lot is that younger people feel like they can't participate because they're not experts on a topic. Like they're not experts on environmentalism, or they're not experts on voting, and they're not experienced in politics or policy or anything like that. And I think that sort of attitude makes us feel like if I don't have the same experience or expertise as somebody older than me, this isn't really my role, or I'm not supposed to be here. And I think that sort of like a little bit of imposter syndrome does hit. And the hope that I'm seeing is that people are realizing that any little thing they do can help, and that you don't have to be an expert to give a little bit of your time or just to give a little bit of your passion and effort. And that when people come together, all of that sort of compounds, and you don't need to be perfect at what you do to make that impact, which gives me a lot of hope.
I really agree with that, but I do want to like I guess talk about one thing almost on the flip side, not exactly, which is that I think, well, two parts again. I think one that I often see is that a lot of people, especially like more so within this like youth nonprofit space, like you just see more and more of like the same nonprofits being built again and again. And I think so many people love to design solutions for, and I was having a really long conversation about this with someone the other day, but people love to design solutions for like communities that they're not even a part of, that they don't really even understand. Instead of actually offering like resources and education to people within that community to be doing that work because they have those lived experiences. So it is really important, not every single thing has to be, that doesn't always work in every case scenario, but it is important to be supporting the groups that you're trying to help solve rather than just trying to create this like overall overarching like solution to again, something that you haven't really personally lived through and don't really know the in and outs many times of like the problem that you're trying to deal with.
No, I totally agree. I think empowering the people who are affected to make their own solutions in a way that benefits them is a lot more, I think, effective because it comes from the ground up rather than somebody who's unfamiliar with the situation making those decisions.
One thing I would like to add on that I kind of see as a challenge happening once COVID ends is really how we're going to start continuing to engage with new organizations that pop up. I know through virtually we have so many methods to meet up with some, get our youth connected. But I think that's going to be a challenge for us to do once we go back in person. I know that when I was in person, I didn't really know much communities or organizations around me that challenged the issues that I got most passionate about. And once I really connected with one organization, I knew my network really expanded. But it's going to be a challenge for a lot of the new generations that are going to be in person. And I think another issue that really pops up with a lot of the organizations I do and a lot of legislative bodies such as the Congress and our state house, it is really understanding the laws that they go through. I know that a lot of us are really surprised whenever the parliamentarian in Congress gave that ruling. But what a lot of youths don't understand is how parliamentary procedures are utilized. I know a lot of organizations don't even have a parliamentarian on hand. And so it's really teaching youth these meaningful skills.
Okay, I would like to move on. So this question kind of stems from what everyone's saying, and it's What does civic education look like in your high school right now, and what would you like it to look like? Now, this comes from, so we're all part of the youth club. Now, we got to meet in Seattle and Atlanta and New York for, I mean, we got to meet over Zoom for that. But what I thought our school was good on civic education. I was like, oh, they teach us about service and whatever. But then I went to the collab and I'm like, never mind, they don't teach a thing. But like, it's like we learn about like world wars and like, like, which is interesting, but you still need a class to show like this is what you have to do as a civic citizen, like what we learn, like power, citizenship, like all of these things is so important, and like it's so non-existent in classes when I think it's such like a life, like it's a life skill that you need, and I really wish that we have that in our high schools.
I can start this off. I'm basically similar like Irshad. I thought I knew something about civic education. I met every single one of you, and I was like, no, I don't know anything. But I really, my school is a really STEM forward school. I said it before, I'll say it again. And we don't have any courses that really teach you about civics until you get to your senior year, and that's government and econ. And that still doesn't really touch upon the big subjects of how can you be a meaningful citizen. And so we do have some clubs in our school that do service oriented projects, but no club that really can focus on civics in your local community. And so I founded my club, DeBakey Civics, that really connected youth to the representatives, led youth to apply for grants for the project, and really taught them the walks of a bunch of the legislative process that's been happening. And I just feel like we could do so much more in teaching our youth civics. And I know that one of the actions I'm currently pursuing right now is the implementation of ethnic studies within the coursework of Houston students. It has been approved by the Texas Education Committee, but there hasn't been any plan or any intent to really implement that into school systems. And so that's really what my work is right now.
Yeah, I think building off of that, just first off, David, that work sounds really important, and I'm really glad that you are working on that. That just sounds amazing. But yeah, I do think that like the civic education we get in schools is mostly, I would say almost non-existent until you get to a government class. And even when you do, the way that we're taught about civics and legal systems and government isn't in a way that promotes community. It's often in a way that promotes individualism and like, what can we do for ourselves? What can we do to get a good test score? And like, how can we pass this class? But it's not necessarily in a way of how can I take what I've learned and bring it back to my community and really root it in what's happening around me. And oftentimes, like, I'm so glad Martine is working on this project about her community and the education of the society around her, because there's so much about our local community and the history of it that gets overlooked. And I think that is a really important component of our civic education, because we have to understand our surroundings in order to be able to make a positive impact on them. And so, like, I think you guys touched on, a lot of that burden falls on our clubs and the student-led groups. And while that work is great, it's not necessarily supported in a way that it could be by having that curricular civic education component, which I do think implementing that is absolutely critical.
I think another really big piece to the education component too is actual application of civic engagement. And what I mean by that is we go to class and we read out of a textbook or something of the sort, and we're supposed to just understand civic education and how to be civically engaged. But I think something that's really important is giving students opportunities to be civically engaged, whether that's serving their community, whether that's voting, whatever, and so on. I think it's important that we get students to actually engage in the community instead of just sitting in the classroom and learning about it. I mean, I think it's two-part, but I think that's really important. And that can materialize in a lot of different ways. It can materialize in the community, it can materialize in the school. I don't know if we had a nationwide service network or something of the sort too, like that's all ways to do it. But I think that's a really, really big component of getting people to remain civically engaged as well.
Yeah, so at my high school, there's actually, the Syracuse City School District, we have a track, or not even, it's a course required for graduation unless you take like AP Government. That's called Active Citizenship, and the way it's taught at Nottingham, I haven't taken it, I'm not a senior, but to my knowledge is actually really great. So I feel like that's a small like thought in the or small experience, I guess, within conversations like these, because often people don't have those classes. So I guess I'm really grateful that that's something we've offered and sort of like manipulated the state standards to make sure that students are like civically prepared. But I definitely think that you always need to be doing more to actually like manipulate that that knowledge into like real sustained action. So I think those community school partnerships are so important. And one thing I have noticed, many of our clubs, I think Aditi was talking about this a bit, but many of our clubs are like pretty civic or social justice minded, which is super cool. But something I think we've been all struggling with is like how we can do more outreach with those clubs to like a larger student body, because I think like, you know, once you've done a certain number of Zooms, you sort of expect to see the same faces, and it's always exciting to see a new one. But I think just organizing an outreach in COVID, especially like at the hyper local level, I think can be really difficult, and like hopefully something that happens, you know, maybe we'll all get vaccinated and it's not as much of an issue soon. But I think understanding how those clubs play a role within that civic education too, and how effective that experience is for like the entire student body.
Yeah, I think my school experiences are really similar to everyone else. So in freshman year, I took like an AP Human Geo class, and like that's in terms of like what civics should be tied into like freshman curriculum, they ended up taking 2 weeks at the end of the year when we were like done the AP test, and that was like pretty much the entirety of like civic education. And now I'm in AP GoPo, but like many people mentioned, it's just reading the textbook, and it's a lot of just like history and not really any application of it. I would say the most application that's happened in school is this project that we had to do called Project Citizen in freshman year. I don't know if any of you guys have also done that before, but it's so structured in terms of like what problems like students can try to solve, and like what you need to like create a petition, you need to create this, and it by the time like you get to the end of it, it's like, is that really learning it, or is that just like, you know, I just want to get a good grade on this project, so I'm just going to go through all the steps. So I think really making students like self-learners, trying as much as possible to get them to learn these things on their own rather than reading about it. But that in and of itself is a really difficult task to take on. But I think providing students with those skills of like how to become more inquisitive and how to kind of look at these problems consistently in and out of the classroom, I think is definitely something that can be done. And then hopefully incorporating that more so into civics class, and students really be able to create something tangible by the end of it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Megan highlighted in her example is really important, because a lot of the times the civic education we do get through these projects is driven by like external motivators given to us by our educators. So like, if you do this, you'll get a good grade on the project, or this is a requirement to graduate, or that sort of thing. And I think starting civic education earlier can sort of build more of this internal locus of having personal responsibility to your community. And that, I think, is what promotes longevity, because in one way we can teach everybody that if you do this civic action, you will be rewarded this way. And that works for the time being. But in terms of the long run, sort of instilling that sense of responsibility to community and sense of, I guess, having that community that you feel you are a part of and that you owe some sort of action to, will promote something more in the long run.
I think it's sad how we have to choose between like school and then like our projects. It's always like, and then you choose your projects and people are like, oh my God, that's so like, why are you wasting your time? Like, do the ACT instead. I'm like, no, I don't see a tangible, like I don't see any benefit from this. I'd rather spend my time working. And it's just so annoying that we have to choose between these things. And then if you choose the other, then you get like negative, like just negativity from it. So I hope that that can change, that stigma can change. So to wrap up, so we're going to do, what is the most meaningful or valuable thing that you've learned from this conversation?
I can start it off. It's don't try to quantify your results. Like we try so hard as human beings to really see what work we've done and really trying to put numbers towards the progress we made, but that can't always happen. We have to be really passionate about what we're doing and really hope that we can create the change that we want to see. It's not going to happen overnight. you got to walk on it, and you got to really listen out to your communities. I know that a lot of older folks in my community are now trying to help out. I know when I made a community garden, a lot of my neighbors who were in the like 60s and 70s and 80s were like, oh, this piece of concrete is not going to get you any results. And so once I started putting the work down, a lot of them really started to come out. They were like, hey, like I got some seeds. Would you mind planting them? They were like, I would like to help out with this. And now I'm just seeing them sitting right there in front of the garden, really just enjoying themselves. And that's work you really can't quantify. It's something you see, it's something you experience.
I like how, yeah, like David said about not trying to find like results. And then yeah, but yeah, I think that's like the biggest thing. I think we just all talked about like building off each other, working with connections, and then just not being result focused. And it actually reminds me of like it was like the starfish store. I don't know if you've heard of it, but like there's like a bunch of like dying starfish on the beach, and this guy is like starting to throw them all back. And one of like the older guys comes in and goes, "What are you doing? You're just wasting your time." He's like, "No, one starfish saved is like a lot." And I think just realizing like one person and one initiative that you do holds a lot of power.
I think another thing, and I saw this during when we all like met each other in Citizen University as well. I think the coolest part of it all was that when we're like working in our own communities, we feel like the work that we're doing is so like exclusive, and it's like only something that's going on here. And then when you like meet all these other people that are like the same age as you realize like, whoa, like everyone's doing the same thing. We're all like working in this space, like even if it's like slightly different per community, it's ultimately all boils down to like a lot of the same skills and a lot of the same things that you have to end up completing. So I think it's really evident in this conversation as well. Like we talk about different fields within the works that we're doing, but it all comes down to a lot of the same challenges that we're kind of dealing with and the same solutions that we're kind of creating as well. So it's always really cool, and I think it's really great to always be connecting with like other young people around, no matter like what field you're in, because you really learn a lot from talking to each other. So that's, you know, a conversation that should not stop just like within your own community.
Yeah, I agree. And building off of that, or just sort of going back to our conversation agreements too, one of the things we talked about was that there's so many commonalities and so many differences in all the work that we do as well. And we are all working in such different focuses because our communities are different. And that's very exciting for me to see, I think, because it lets me learn more about the communities in which you guys are living in and the struggles that you and your peers face. But at the same time, there's so many commonalities in the way that we're approaching that work and like the strategies that we're using. I know, for instance, a lot of us have some educational or teaching component to what we do, whether it's environmental or public speaking or racial justice or history or anything like that. So I think sort of finding those same strategies is very interesting for me to see because it connects youth, because I think it just shows that we all think a little bit in the same way, but we also have this local lens to what we're seeing and what we're facing, which is really inspiring for me to see.
It's hard for me to think of something else besides it's already been touched on, to be honest. Yeah, you all have nailed it. I think though, the one that I really resonated with, and I think David touched on it a little bit, was just change doesn't necessarily happen overnight, but that doesn't mean that it's not impactful, the work that you're doing. And that spoke to me. I think, especially in the civic world, in the political world, and the organizing world, it is very hard to get things to happen quickly many times, but every so often, there'll be a big change, there'll be a big difference, something positive will happen. And I think that's important to internalize, but it's also to remember the day by day and to take every day and realize that there's successes within it that are going towards achieving that bigger common goal.
Yeah, I'm definitely feeling like almost like a mini like celebration, like a sense of celebration. I think it's sort of timed almost as a year since like COVID began and like, the lockdown began. And I think it's sort of like, I think especially towards the beginning, because I feel like there have been like multiple areas of COVID, like the idea of organizing in a pandemic is like wild, crazy, unimaginable, but we've clearly all figured out how to do it in some capacity. And I think just like a lot of like excitement around that we have done that. And I just like, I can't wait for like all of us to like be reconnected, and whether it be like college or later on in life. And it's also making me want to do like a youth collab. Like we need to do a bigger Zoom reunion outside of the WhatsApp. I think just the biggest takeaway is that even if it's discouraging on a day-to-day basis, occasionally, if it's, you know, hard to quantify the kind of work we've been doing, we've clearly all been doing it, and it's all made a really incredible impact.
Since we have a little bit of time, what is one piece of advice you would give people that are trying to make a difference in the community?
I guess I can start it off again. Just because you don't see someone who looks like you and doing the work that you're doing doesn't mean that you should quit and leave. I think there's a lot of people who just don't see themselves really becoming an agent of change. We've seen this now with our vice president finally becoming the first woman. I know a lot of women have really been hesitant about what role they can have in government, and I can see that a lot of people now are really changing that, so that norm that we've had. And I know here in Houston, we've had so many people of color actually get into offices and are leading our cities and are making such great progress. And so my advice for youth would be, just because you're going to be the first person of your kind to create this impact doesn't mean you're the last. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't empower others. It just means that you're just the beginning of a new change. And that's so hopeful, that's so optimistic.
I think for me, I would just say follow your passions. I think we live in a culture, especially young people, where it's all about the resume and the title. And I say young people, but I think it also just kind of spans across life, especially lately. And I don't think that's what it's about, right? We don't live to create a resume. And so I really just urge people to follow their passions. So that's my big thing. And then I'll say too, that if somebody talked about, I don't remember who it was, I apologize, but you don't have to be an expert. I mean, raise your hand if you were an expert when you started. Exactly. Like you don't start as an expert. I mean, you start at varying places. And so you don't need to be the best of the best to make a difference.
Yeah, I think going off of Alex's point, one of the things Megan touched on earlier was that we don't necessarily need to always start things that speak for other people, especially groups that we're not a part of. So I think returning power to the people who it affects and who it impacts is how we grow. And like Alex said, like it's not about building a resume or being the founder of something all the time. Sometimes it's about taking the power that you have and giving it away, not necessarily hoarding it. And I think that's something that is hard for us to quantify because it seems counterintuitive, because so often we're taught to like add as many bullet points to your resume as possible, build up as much experience as possible, and giving whatever we've earned back to somebody who might need it and who it might compound with more is not always recognized or praised as often, but it's something that's really necessary to the longevity of any of our movements. So I would just encourage people to stay community minded and really put power back in the people who need it.
I think my biggest advice would just be to like listen to those around you. Like Aditi was saying, listen to like the communities most affected. And if you're one of those, like listen to your peers, listen to your friends, and also like listen to yourself within that. And also, I guess plug like host a living room conversation. Like I think like people were so used to interacting with like younger people or people at our high school all the time, but I think intergenerational work is something I've found in the last couple of years to be so effective and so important. Like listen to and set up a call with like someone at like your local like League of Women Voters or something, like or groups like that. I think just understanding where different people's experiences and therefore like their thoughts are coming from is super important, and getting as much of that as possible, especially now that we can in a digital age, is really valuable.
And I think just like wrapping it up, something that applies to all of our work, like it is okay to fail and it is okay to not know what you're doing. And I don't even like to use like the word fail, because every single time that you maybe like something you start and it's like not turning out exactly like how you maybe originally imagined it, doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad, and not everything that you're going to create and try to do is going to work out, and that's totally okay. That's totally fine. I think each experience builds on top of each other and gives you a lot more expertise before you start that next project. So it's okay to, try something in a field that you're not super knowledgeable about. Find that maybe it's not your niche and not something that you are maybe as passionate about as you thought. Move to something else and kind of use those experiences to build up to something a lot bigger. But I think it's really important to, like, every time you do something though, to like take those experiences away and think about like, what did I learn from doing that, and then kind of be able to apply that to your next thing.
My piece would be, you have to be comfortable becoming uncomfortable, because it's not always sometimes you're going to be the only person and people are going to think you're crazy. Sometimes your reputation is going to be on hold, but you have to be able to fight for what's right and put like yourself, like your reputation, your name, your like relationship, like you can't put that in front of like standing up for what's right. So you see so many times where people are like, I want to do good, but like I don't want to, that's too far. That's too, like, I don't want to go and talk to the district board, even if it's going to get me, but you have to be able to take that. You can't, like, obviously like take it like step by step, but you have to take that uncomfortable step and stand up or say something. And that really is what matters, I think, when it comes to civics. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Thanks for bringing us together today. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah.
Yes, it was great to see everyone, and everyone should do one of these conversations. I think this is my second time doing it, and it's always refreshing. It's always fun. So I highly recommend.
I do too. It's super fun, and just hearing from everybody was so amazing.
I'm going to be honest, I came into this conversation really thinking that I was going to get blown off my socks, but I've become a member of this conversation. I really helped leverage this, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
I do want to say, like, it's always so interesting how, like, you think, especially these conversations you're doing with a group of people that you know, or like know to some extent, like it's not going to be as interesting. But even with people that you know fairly well, like it's interesting. It's with people that you don't know at all, it's kind of an interesting conversation. So I think like any group, it's worth to kind of like ask these questions and think about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you guys so much for coming, and for everyone that joined us on the live stream. So as you can see, it's super easy, like they've all said, to have a conversation like this. It's just a matter of setting a date and a time, conversation with an open mind. We have a youth monthly cohort that meets, like I mentioned. The link is in the guide that we provided, and you can also join or host a conversation with Junto, our new conversation platform. Again, all of this is on the guide and on the website. Again, thank you so much for coming. Bye.